The training room fell silent as Commander Zethkar walked to the front. His 4 arms moved slowly, each one bearing scars from battles the young recruits could not imagine. His crystalline skin caught the light from the ceiling panels, creating rainbow patterns across his weathered face. The new soldiers sat straight in their chairs, waiting for their first lesson about the enemy they would soon face. Zethkar looked at each young face in the room. They came from different worlds, different species, but they all shared the same eager expression. They wanted to hear about glory and victory. They wanted stories that would make them feel brave and ready for war. He would not give them what they wanted, he would give them what they needed. "You think you know about war," Zethkar said, his voice quiet but clear. "You have studied tactics and weapons. You have practiced formations and learned about honor in battle. You believe that war follows rules, that civilized beings fight in civilized ways." He paused and turned to look out the window at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, human ships moved through space, carrying soldiers who did not follow any rules the galaxy understood. "Today I will tell you about humans," he continued. "I will tell you why 3 empires made peace with a species that should have been easy to defeat. I will tell you why we now ask humans to teach us how to fight, instead of fighting against them." A young Rillan recruit raised one of his tentacles. "Sir, are humans really as dangerous as the reports say? They have no natural weapons, no thick shells or sharp claws. Their technology is hundreds of years behind ours." Zethkar turned back to face the group. His large eyes, each one a different shade of blue, focused on the young soldier. "That is exactly what we thought when we first met them. We thought they would be easy to conquer." He moved to a chair and sat down, his 4 arms resting on his knees. "Let me tell you about New Denver." It was a small human colony on the edge of their space. Maybe 50,000 people lived there. Farmers, miners, shopkeepers. Simple people, living simple lives. Our intelligence reports said they had no military base, no weapons factories, no defenses worth mentioning. The recruits leaned forward. This sounded like the kind of easy victory they expected to hear about. "High Command sent 1 battle group to take the planet," Zethkar continued. 12 ships, 4,000 soldiers. The plan was simple. Land. Demand surrender, accept their submission. Move on to the next target. The whole operation should have taken 1 day. He stood and began to pace in front of the recruits. I was a young lieutenant then, leading my first assault squad. We dropped from orbit in the early morning, expecting to find frightened civilians ready to give up. Instead, we found something else entirely. Zethkar's voice grew quieter, and the recruits had to strain to hear him. The humans were waiting. For us, not with armies or advanced weapons, but with something much worse. They were waiting with purpose. A Vorthan recruit clicked her mandibles together nervously. "What do you mean, sir?" "When we landed outside the main city, we found empty streets, no people running in panic, no white flags of surrender. Just silence. Our commander, Captain Morthick, sent scout teams to find the human leaders and arrange their surrender. That was standard procedure for conquering a civilian world." Zethkar stopped pacing and looked directly at the recruits. "The scout teams never came back." He let that sink in before continuing. After 6 hours with no contact, Captain Morthick ordered a full advance into the city. We expected to find our missing scouts and deal with whatever small resistance the humans had managed to organize. The commander's expression grew dark as he remembered that day. "We found our scouts. They were dead, but not killed in any way. We understood, no energy weapon burns, no projectile wounds. They had been killed with tools. Garden tools, kitchen knives, pieces of broken metal. The humans had used whatever they could find to turn our soldiers into examples." One of the younger recruits made a soft sound of distress. Zethkar ignored it and continued. "But that was not the worst part. The worst part was what the humans did next. As we moved deeper into the city, every building became a trap. Every street corner hid an ambush. These farmers and shopkeepers had turned their entire city into a weapon aimed at us. He moved to a wall display and activated it, showing a map of the new Denver colony. Captain Jake Morrison was the human leader. He had been a soldier once, years before, but now he ran a small farming equipment business. Lieutenant Amy Collins managed the colony's power grid. Neither of them should have been a threat to trained military forces. The map showed the layout of the city, with red marks indicating where battles had occurred. There were dozens of them, scattered throughout the residential and commercial areas. Morrison and Collins had spent 3 days preparing for our arrival. They did not try to build walls or create defensive positions like proper military forces would. Instead, they turned ordinary buildings into killing zones. Zethkar touched the display, and it zoomed in on one section of the city. This was a medical clinic. When my squad approached it, we could see human civilians inside, including wounded people who needed help. Standard galactic law requires that medical facilities be treated as neutral ground during conflicts. He paused, his 4 hands clenching into fists. We announced our presence and demanded entry to check for military personnel. The humans inside responded by asking us to send in medical supplies for their wounded. It seemed like a reasonable request from desperate civilians. The display changed to show a cross-section view of the building. Lieutenant Vextar volunteered to take medical supplies inside. He was always the most compassionate of my soldiers, always trying to help civilians caught in war zones. The humans welcomed him inside and thanked him for his kindness. Zethkar's voice became very quiet. 10 minutes later, the entire building exploded. Several recruits gasped. The display showed the destruction radius, indicating that the blast had been powerful enough to level nearby structures as well. We found out later that the humans had spent those 3 days wiring their medical clinic with every explosive they could find. Mining charges, fuel cells, even kitchen gas tanks. They sacrificed their own wounded and their medical staff to kill 12 of my soldiers. A Caltharian recruit raised 2 of his arms. Sir, that violates every law of civilized warfare. Medical facilities are supposed to be protected. Yes, Zethkar agreed. It violates our laws. But humans do not follow our laws. They follow their own logic, and their logic says that if killing 12 enemy soldiers requires sacrificing 30 of their own people, that is an acceptable trade. He moved to another section of the map. This pattern repeated throughout the city. Every building we entered was a trap. The school had been turned into a sniper nest, with teachers and parents taking turns shooting at us from classroom windows. The shopping center had been rigged with so many improvised explosives that when we finally triggered them, the blast was visible from orbit. The recruits sat in stunned silence as Zethkar continued his story. The fighting went on for 3 days. 3 days to conquer a small farming colony with no military defenses. We lost 400 soldiers. The humans lost nearly 20,000 people, almost half their population. He turned back to face the group. On the 3rd night, Captain Morrison contacted us directly. He was wounded, hiding in the ruins of what had been a children's playground. Most of his people were dead or dying. His ammunition was almost gone. Any reasonable military commander would have surrendered at that point. Zethkar's 4 arms spread wide. Instead, Morrison made us an offer. He said the remaining humans would stop fighting if we agreed to leave their world immediately. If we refused, they would detonate the remaining explosives they had planted throughout the city. These explosives were positioned under our field headquarters, our supply depot, and our medical station. The commander sat down again, suddenly. Looking very tired, Morrison was not trying to win. He was trying to make sure we lost more than we gained. He was willing to destroy everything, including the rest of his own people, to make our victory meaningless. A young recruit raised her hand. "What did you do, sir?" Captain Morthick was a career soldier with 30 years of experience. He had conquered dozens of worlds for the Empire, but he had never faced anything like this. He agreed to Morrison's terms. We withdrew from New Denver that same night. Zethkar stood and walked back to the window, looking out at the stars. The battle. Reports called it a victory. We had occupied the planet for 3 days and inflicted heavy casualties on the enemy. But every soldier who was there knew the truth. The humans had won by making us afraid to stay. He turned back to the recruits one last time. "That was my first lesson about human warfare. They do not fight to win battles. They fight to make their enemies pay such a high price for victory that the victory becomes worthless." The training room remained silent as the recruits absorbed what they had heard. Finally, Zethkar spoke again. "Tomorrow I will tell you about Titan Station, where we learned that humans can turn their own deaths into weapons. But for today, remember this. When humans go to war, they are not trying to save themselves. They are trying to teach their enemies why war was a mistake." The next morning, Commander Zethkar entered the training room to find his recruits already seated and waiting. Word of his stories had spread through the base overnight. More young soldiers had joined the group, curious to hear about the humans, who had changed galactic warfare forever. The room was packed with eager faces from a dozen different species. Zethkar noticed the increased attendance but said nothing about it. He simply took his position at the front of the room and began to speak. "Yesterday I told you about New Denver, where we first learned that humans do not follow the rules of civilized warfare. Today I will tell you about Titan Station, where we learned that humans can make weapons out of their own suffering." He activated the wall display, showing a massive space station orbiting a gas giant. The structure was enormous, easily the size of several city blocks. Solar panels stretched out like wings from the central hub, and docking bays dotted its surface like pockets. Titan Station was the largest human military installation in the Outer Rim territories. It housed 50,000 people, including military personnel, civilian contractors, scientists, and their families. The station served as a supply depot, research facility, and command center for human operations in that sector. A young Rillan recruit raised a tentacle. "Sir, why did High Command decide to attack such a large target?" Zethkar's forearms moved slowly as he considered the question. "Because we thought size would work in our favor. 50,000 people need food, water, air, and power to survive. Cut off their supplies, and they would have to surrender quickly, or watch their families die slowly." The display changed to show the surrounding space, with red dots indicating the positions of Caltharian ships. There were dozens of them, forming a complete blockade around the station. Fleet Admiral Korthvin brought 47 ships to surround Titan Station. We had enough firepower to destroy the facility completely, but High Command wanted to capture it intact. The humans had been developing new technologies there, and we wanted those secrets for ourselves. Zethkar moved closer to the display, pointing at the formation of alien ships. The blockade was perfect. No supplies could reach the station. No evacuation ships could leave. We sent a message to the human commander, demanding surrender within 72 hours. We expected negotiations to begin immediately. He paused, his large blue eyes focusing on something the recruits could not see. Commander Alex Turner was the officer in charge of Titan Station. According to our intelligence files, he was a career administrator, not a combat soldier. He had spent most of his service managing supply chains and logistics operations. We thought he would understand that his situation was hopeless. The display showed a human male in his 50s, with gray hair and tired eyes. He looked like someone who worked behind a desk, not someone who would lead a desperate defense. Turner's response came exactly 72 hours later. It was not a surrender. It was not a request for negotiations. It was a simple message that said, "Come and take it if you can." Several recruits made sounds of surprise. The concept of refusing surrender when facing impossible odds was still difficult for many species to understand. Admiral Corthan was insulted by this response. He ordered immediate assault operations to begin. The plan was to use boarding pods to take control of key sections of the station, then force the humans to surrender to protect their civilian population. Zefkar turned away from the display and faced his audience directly. I was promoted to captain after New Denver, and I led one of the boarding teams. My target was the station's main power plant. Control that, and we could shut down life support throughout the facility. The commander's expression grew dark as he continued. The first wave of boarding pods launched at dawn, ship time. 36 pods carrying over 400 soldiers. We expected light resistance from station security forces, maybe some improvised barricades in the corridors. He activated a new section of the display, showing the internal layout of Titan Station. What we found was something entirely different. The humans had spent those 3 days of ultimatum preparing, but not in any way we could have predicted. The display showed cross-sections of the station's corridors and rooms. Many of them were marked with warning symbols. Dr. Lisa Hayes was the station's chief xenobiologist. Before the war, she studied alien plant and animal life for peaceful research. When the blockade began, Commander Turner put her in charge of defensive preparations. A new image appeared on the display showing a middle-aged human woman in a laboratory coat. She looked harmless, like someone who spent her time looking at specimens under a microscope. Dr. Hayes had access to biological samples from dozens of different worlds. She knew which alien plants produced toxic gases, which microorganisms could eat through metal, which chemicals could cause paralysis or hallucinations in different species. Zefkar's 4 hands clenched as he remembered what came next. When our boarding pods cut through the station's hull, we encountered the first of Dr. Hayes' surprises. She had released modified atmospheric bacteria into the ventilation system. These bacteria were harmless to humans, but caused severe respiratory distress in most other species. The recruits looked uncomfortable as they realized what this meant. Chemical and biological weapons were considered especially dishonorable in galactic warfare conventions. My boarding team had to advance through corridors filled with toxic air while wearing emergency breathing gear. Our vision was limited. Our movement was clumsy, and the humans knew exactly where we were at all times. The display showed a schematic of the power plant section, with multiple routes marked in different colors. But the atmospheric toxins were just the beginning. Dr. Hayes had also prepared what she called environmental traps throughout the station. Zefkar moved to a specific section of the schematic. This was a maintenance tunnel that led directly to the main power generators. It looked like the perfect route for a quick assault. The tunnel was wide enough for my entire team to move through quickly, and it bypassed most of the station's defensive positions. He highlighted the tunnel in red. Dr. Hayes had filled this tunnel with a mixture of lubricating oil and metal, shavings from the station's machine shops. When we entered the tunnel, she ignited the mixture using the station's electrical systems. Several recruits made sounds of distress. Fire was a terrifying weapon in the enclosed spaces of a space station. 6 of my soldiers died in that tunnel. The rest of us barely escaped with severe burns. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was that Dr. Hayes had been watching us through security cameras. She timed the ignition perfectly to cause maximum casualties. Zefkar's voice became quieter as he continued. We regrouped and tried a different approach. There was a cargo bay that connected to the power plant through a series of maintenance shafts. It seemed safer than the main corridors. The display showed the new route, marked in blue. Captain Ben Clark was waiting for us there. He had been a Special Forces soldier before being assigned to Titan Station. Commander Turner had put him in charge of active defense operations. A new image appeared showing a tall, muscular human male in military gear. Unlike the other humans they had discussed, Clark looked like a warrior. Captain Clark had spent those 3 days setting up what humans call kill zones throughout the station. These were areas where he could channel attacking forces into positions where they could be eliminated efficiently. The schematic changed to show overlapping fields of fire and concealed positions throughout the cargo bay area. When my team entered the cargo bay, Clark was ready for us. But he did not use conventional weapons or tactics. Zethkar paused, his expression becoming haunted. Clark had rigged sections of the station's hull to explosive decompression. When we were halfway across the cargo bay, he blew out an entire wall panel. The recruits gasped as they realized what this meant. Explosive decompression in a space station could kill everyone in the affected area. 8 of my soldiers were sucked out into space instantly. The rest of us were thrown against bulkheads by the rushing air. Clark and his team were prepared for the decompression, wearing magnetic boots and safety lines. They used those few seconds of chaos to eliminate most of my remaining troops. The commander sat down heavily in his chair. I survived only because I managed to grab onto a support beam. When emergency blast doors sealed the breach, I found myself alone in the cargo bay with Captain Clark. He looked directly at the recruits. Clark could have killed me easily. I was wounded, disoriented, and separated from my weapon. Instead, he helped me to my feet and offered me medical attention. This unexpected turn in the story confused many of the young soldiers. Acts of mercy were normal in civilized warfare. But everything they had heard about humans suggested they did not follow normal rules. I asked Clark why he was helping me. His answer taught me something important about how humans think about warfare. Zethkar stood and began pacing again. Clark said that killing me would serve no tactical purpose. I was no longer a threat, and my death would not help defend the station. But keeping me alive might be useful later. The display changed to show casualty reports from the boarding operation. The numbers were shocking. The third day brought even more alien soldiers to hear Commander Zethkar's stories. Word had spread beyond the training facility to other military bases on the moon. Officers and veterans had begun attending alongside the new recruits. The room was so crowded that many had to stand along the walls. Zethkar entered to find this larger audience waiting for him in complete silence. He looked around the room, noting the mix of young faces and experienced warriors. All of them wanted to understand the humans who had changed everything they thought they knew about warfare. "I see that more of you have joined us," Zethkar said, his 4 arms moving slowly as he surveyed the crowd. "Good. What I have to tell you today is something every soldier in the galaxy should hear." He activated the wall display, showing a star map of the Outer Rim territories. Several systems were marked in red, indicating areas of active conflict. 18 months into the war with humanity, our forces controlled most of the Outer Rim. We had captured dozens of human colonies and driven their fleets from key strategic positions. High Command believed we were close to total victory. The display zoomed in on one particular system near the edge of Caltharian space. The Vega Nebula was the site of our final offensive against organized human resistance in that sector. Intelligence reports indicated that a human fleet was trapped there, cut off from resupply and reinforcement. A young Caltharian recruit raised 2 of his arms. "Sir, if the humans were trapped, why did it take 18 months to reach that point?" Zethkar's expression grew thoughtful. "Because humans do not fight the way other species fight. When we capture territory, we expect the enemy to retreat and regroup at defensible positions. Humans do not retreat. They disappear, then attack from directions we never expect." The display changed to show battle reports from various human colonies. Every world we conquered became a source of new problems. Human civilians would pretend to surrender, then attack our occupation forces weeks or months later. Human military units would scatter when defeated, then reform as guerrilla fighters behind our lines. He moved to stand directly in front of the assembled soldiers. But in the Vega Nebula, we finally had them cornered. Admiral Kate Sullivan commanded a fleet of 17 human ships, all damaged from previous battles. They had taken refuge inside the nebula where our sensors had difficulty tracking them. The display showed the nebula itself, a swirling mass of gas and cosmic dust that stretched across several light years. Red dots indicated the positions of human ships deep within the cloud. Fleet Admiral Vorthake surrounded the nebula with 63 ships. We had overwhelming superiority in numbers, firepower, and technology. The human fleet was trapped with no escape route and no hope of reinforcement. Zefkar paused, his large blue eyes focusing on something the audience could not see. Admiral Vorthek sent the standard surrender demand to Admiral Sullivan. We offered honorable terms. The human crews would be treated as prisoners of war according to galactic conventions. The display showed the text of the surrender demand and the timestamp indicating when it was transmitted. Below it was the timestamp of Admiral Sullivan's response. Admiral Sullivan's reply came 6 hours later. It was brief. We respectfully decline your offer. Prepare for battle. Several veterans in the audience made sounds of approval. Refusing surrender in hopeless circumstances was considered honorable by most galactic military traditions. Admiral Vorthek was pleased by this response. He expected a final battle that would end with the destruction of the human fleet and the capture of any survivors. It would be a clean conclusion to the campaign in that sector. Zefkar activated a new section of the display showing the tactical formation of the Caltharian fleet. We positioned our ships in a sphere around the nebula, ready to intercept the humans when they tried to break out. Our plan was to force them into open space where our superior numbers would guarantee victory. The commander's expression grew dark as he continued. For 12 hours, nothing happened. The human ships remained deep inside the nebula, apparently preparing for their final battle. Our sensors detected minimal activity, just basic life support and communication systems. He moved to point at specific areas on the tactical display. Then, at exactly noon ship time, the human fleet began to move. 17 ships in perfect formation, heading directly toward our heaviest concentration of forces. The display showed the movement of human ships as red arrows pushing through the nebula toward the alien blockade. What we saw next defied everything we understood about space combat tactics. Zefkar's 4 hands clenched as he remembered the moment. The human ships were moving faster than they should have been able to move with damaged engines. They were maintaining perfect formation despite flying through a nebula that should have disrupted their navigation systems. And they were broadcasting on all frequencies. The display changed to show communication logs from the battle. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Brooks was the captain of the human destroyer Defiant. His ship had been heavily damaged in a previous engagement and should barely have been able to maintain life support. A new image appeared showing a human male in his 30s, wearing a torn and blood-stained uniform. His face was pale, and his eyes had dark circles around them. Brooks was broadcasting tactical information to the other human ships, coordinating their attack with precision that seemed impossible given their condition. But there was something wrong with his voice, something that made our communication officers uncomfortable. Zefkar turned to face his audience directly. Brooks sounded like he was dying. The room fell silent as the implications of this statement sank in. Our medical scanners confirmed what we suspected. The human crews were suffering from severe radiation poisoning. They should have been unconscious or dead, but somehow they were still fighting their ships. The display showed medical readouts from the Caltharian fleet sensors. The data indicated lethal levels of radiation aboard every human vessel. Engineer specialist Nicole Adams had been working on the human ships for those 12 hours of silence. She had found a way to overload their reactor cores, channeling massive amounts of energy to weapons and engines. The process was killing the crews with radiation, but it gave their damaged ships the power they needed for one final attack. A veteran Rillan officer raised a tentacle. "Sir, why would they choose certain death over surrender?" Zethkar's expression became haunted. Because Admiral Sullivan had decided that dying was more useful than living. She had turned her entire fleet into a weapon aimed at our hearts. The tactical display showed the human ships emerging from the nebula at impossible speed, their weapons charging to levels far beyond their normal specifications. The first human ship to reach our lines was Brooks' destroyer. His reactor was already critical. His crew was dying around him. But he targeted our flagship with everything he had. The display showed the moment of impact as the human destroyer struck the Caltharian command ship. Brooks rammed his ship directly into Admiral Vorthaka's bridge. The collision destroyed both vessels instantly, but it also created a gap in our formation. Zethkar moved to show the cascade of events that followed. The other human ships followed Brooks through the gap he had created. Each one was dying. Each crew was being killed by their own ship's radiation, but they kept fighting with a precision that terrified our forces. The display showed ship after ship as they broke through the Caltharian lines, inflicting damage far beyond what their numbers should have allowed. Admiral Sullivan's flagship was the last to emerge from the nebula. By then, her crew had been exposed to lethal radiation for over 14 hours. A new image appeared showing Admiral Sullivan herself, a woman in her 50s with graying hair and determined eyes. Sullivan sent us one final transmission before her ship's reactor reached critical overload. The display showed the text of her message. "This is Admiral Grace Sullivan of the Human Defense Force. We want you to remember this moment. Remember that we chose to die fighting rather than live as your prisoners. Remember that every human fleet you face from now on has learned from our example." Zethkar's voice became very quiet. Sullivan's ship exploded 30 seconds after she finished transmitting. The blast was so powerful, it damaged 2 of our cruisers and killed everyone aboard her vessel. The tactical display updated to show the final casualty reports. When the battle ended, all 17 human ships had been destroyed. Every human crew member was dead. By any military standard, we had achieved complete victory. He turned back to face his audience, but it did not feel like victory. We had lost 12 ships and over 8,000 crew members. The humans had traded 17 damaged vessels for 12 of our best ships. The commander sat down heavily in his chair. More importantly, they had done something to our forces that no enemy had ever done before. They had made us afraid. A young Vorthan recruit clicked her mandibles nervously. "Afraid of what, sir?" "Afraid of fighting an enemy that considered death to be just another weapon," Zethkar replied. Admiral Sullivan's final message was not a desperate cry from dying soldiers. It was a promise that every future battle with humans would end the same way. The display changed to show psychological evaluation reports from Caltharian medical officers. By the 4th day, the training room could no longer hold everyone who wanted to hear Commander Zethkar's stories. The session had been moved to the main auditorium, and even that was packed beyond capacity. Military officers from across the sector had arrived to hear first-hand accounts of human warfare tactics. Zethkar walked onto the stage and looked out at the sea of alien faces. Representatives from dozens of species filled every seat, and more stood along the walls. These were not just young recruits anymore. These were experienced soldiers, commanders, and strategists who needed to understand the enemy that had changed galactic warfare forever. "Today I will tell you about Kepler 442b, Zethkar began, his voice carrying easily through the large space. "This planet taught us that humans can turn an entire world into a weapon against anyone who tries to take it from them. The massive wall display activated, showing a blue-green world orbiting a distant star. Continents and oceans were clearly visible, along with the geometric patterns of agricultural development and cities. Kepler 442b was one of humanity's terraforming success stories. They had spent 50 years making this world suitable for human life. 2 million people lived there, growing food that was shipped to other human colonies throughout the sector. The display zoomed in to show sprawling farms, mining operations, and several medium-sized cities connected by transportation networks. The planet had strategic value because of its agricultural output, but it was not heavily defended. Intelligence reports indicated minimal military presence, mostly local security forces and a small planetary guard unit. A veteran Rillan commander raised a tentacle from the front row. "Sir, why did High Command decide to invade rather than simply blockade the planet?" Zefkar's forearms moved slowly as he considered the question. "Because we thought a quick occupation would be more efficient than a long siege. 2 million civilians need food and medical supplies. We believed they would surrender quickly to protect their families." The display changed to show the orbital positions of the Caltharian invasion fleet. 42 ships carrying over 60,000 soldiers. General Morthak commanded the invasion force. He was a veteran of 17 successful planetary conquests. His plan was to land at multiple sites simultaneously and establish control of the major population centers within 72 hours. Zefkar moved to the center of the stage, his expression becoming dark. "I commanded a regiment of 3,000 soldiers. Our target was the capital city of New Sacramento, home to 400,000 people. We expected to face police forces and maybe some hastily organized civilian militia." The display showed aerial views of New Sacramento, a modern city with tall buildings surrounded by residential areas and industrial zones. It looked peaceful and prosperous, not like a fortress preparing for war. The first sign that something was wrong came during our orbital approach. The city was completely dark. No lights, no power grid activity, no communication signals. It appeared to be abandoned. Zefkar's voice became quieter, forcing the large audience to strain to hear him. When our dropships landed in the city center, we found empty streets and open buildings. No people, no vehicles, no signs of hasty evacuation. The humans had simply vanished. The display showed footage from Caltharian helmet cameras as soldiers moved through the deserted city. Shops stood open with merchandise still on the shelves. Restaurants had meals still sitting on tables, but there were no people anywhere. Colonel Matt Gibson was the commander of the Planetary Defense Forces. According to our intelligence files, he was a mining engineer who had joined the military reserves to help train local security units. We did not consider him a serious threat. A new image appeared showing a human male in his 40s, wearing civilian clothes and a mining helmet. He looked like someone who spent his time underground, not someone who would organize military resistance. Gibson had spent the 3 weeks before our invasion implementing what humans call scorched earth tactics. But he did not destroy the planet's resources to deny them to us. Instead, he turned those resources into weapons. The display changed to show cross-sections of the planet's crust beneath the major cities. A vast network of tunnels and caverns stretched for hundreds of kilometers in every direction. The humans had been mining this world for 50 years. They had excavated enormous underground complexes for ore extraction and processing. Gibson had spent those 3 weeks connecting these mining networks into a single integrated system. Zefkar pointed to specific areas on the underground map. 2 million people had not disappeared. They had gone underground, taking with them everything they needed to survive and fight for months or even years. A young Caltharian recruit raised 2 arms from the audience. "Sir, how could they move so many people without us detecting it?" "Because they did not move all at once," Zefkar replied. Gibson had been planning this for months, possibly years. Families were relocated gradually to underground facilities. Supplies were stockpiled in caverns beneath the cities. By the time we arrived, the entire planetary population was living in a hidden world beneath our feet. The display showed the complexity of the underground network. Living areas, hydroponic farms, workshops, command centers, all connected by tunnels that stretched across continents. But Gibson had not just hidden his people underground. He had turned the surface world into a trap designed specifically to kill occupying forces. Zethkar's expression became haunted as he continued. Sergeant Linda Torres was Gibson's chief demolitions expert. Before the war, she had worked in the mining industry, using explosives to clear rock and extract ore. Gibson put her in charge of preparing the surface world for our arrival. A new image showed a human woman in work clothes, holding what appeared to be mining equipment. She looked competent and professional, like someone who knew how to handle dangerous tools safely. Torres had spent those 3 weeks placing explosives throughout every city, every building, every piece of infrastructure on the planet. But these were not random bombs designed to cause destruction. They were precisely calculated charges designed to kill specific numbers of enemy soldiers. The display showed schematic diagrams of buildings with explosive charges marked at key structural points. Every building we entered was rigged to collapse in a specific way. Torres had calculated the weight-bearing capacity of each structure, the likely positions of occupying forces, and the most efficient way to eliminate them. Zethkar moved to point at specific examples on the display. This was a school that we converted into a temporary headquarters. Torres had placed charges that would bring down only the upper floors, crushing anyone in the main auditorium while leaving the basement intact. She knew we would use the largest room for command meetings. The audience listened in horrified silence as the commander continued. This was a hospital that we planned to use as a medical facility for our wounded. The charges were positioned to destroy the operating rooms and intensive care units while leaving the morgue undamaged. Torres understood exactly how we would organize our medical operations. The display showed dozens of similar examples throughout the city. Every building had been prepared as a specific type of trap, designed to exploit predictable military behavior. But the surface explosives were just the beginning. Dr. Paul Martinez was the planet's chief medical officer. Gibson had assigned him to develop what they called environmental weapons, using the planet's modified ecosystem. A new image appeared showing a middle-aged human male in a doctor's coat, standing in what appeared to be a laboratory filled with plant specimens. The humans had spent 50 years introducing Earth, plants and animals to this world. Dr. Martinez had detailed knowledge of how these species would affect different alien biologies. He used that knowledge to turn the entire planetary environment into a weapon. Zethkar's 4 hands clenched as he remembered what came next. Martinez had modified common Earth plants to produce toxins that were harmless to humans, but lethal to most other species. He had released these modified organisms throughout the areas where he expected us to establish bases. The display showed microscopic images of the modified plants and their toxic compounds. Our soldiers began falling ill within hours of landing. What appeared to be ordinary grass was producing chemicals that caused respiratory failure in Caltharian physiology. Decorative flowers in city parks released spores that caused paralysis in Vorthan nervous systems. Several alien officers in the audience looked uncomfortable as they realized the implications. Dr. Martinez had essentially turned the entire planet into a biological weapon that targeted every species except humans. Zethkar continued his account with visible difficulty. Captain Johnny Wright was Gibson's reconnaissance specialist. He had been a hunter and guide before the war, someone who knew how to track animals through difficult terrain. Gibson put him in charge of intelligence gathering and long-range elimination of key personnel. The display showed a lean human male, carrying what appeared to be a hunting rifle, dressed in camouflage clothing designed for the planet's forests and mountains. Wright and his team moved through the underground tunnel network, emerging to observe our operations and eliminate important targets, but they did not use conventional military tactics. The fifth and final day brought the largest audience yet. The main auditorium was packed beyond capacity, with military representatives from every major galactic power in attendance. Word of Commander HFY Stories had spread throughout the galaxy, and senior officers had traveled from across known space to hear his final account. HFY walked onto the stage and surveyed the massive crowd. He could see faces from species that had never worked together before, all united by their need to understand the humans who had changed warfare forever. Even representatives from the proud hegemony worlds were present, despite their traditional isolation from galactic affairs. Today I will tell you about the end of the war, HFY began, his voice carrying to every corner of the auditorium. I will tell you about the day when 4 galactic empires learned that humans had been planning for total extinction from the moment fighting began. The enormous wall display activated, showing a strategic map of the entire galactic region. Human space was marked in blue, surrounded by the territories of 4 major alien powers shown in different colors. By the 3rd year of the war, the Caltharian Empire had formed an alliance with the Vorthan Collective, the Rillan Federation, and the hegemony of ancient worlds. Together, we represented the largest military coalition in galactic history. The display showed the combined fleets of all 4 powers, numbering in the thousands of ships. High Command had decided that humanity posed a threat to galactic civilization itself. The humans had introduced new forms of warfare that violated every convention of civilized conflict. They had to be stopped permanently. HFY moved to the center of the stage, his 4 arms gesturing toward the strategic display. The plan was called Operation Final Peace. We would attack Earth itself, the human homeworld, with overwhelming force. The humans would be forced to surrender unconditionally or face the complete destruction of their species. A senior Vorthan admiral clicked her mandibles from the front row. Sir, surely the humans realized they could not win against such overwhelming odds? They did, HFY replied immediately. Intelligence reports confirmed that human leadership understood the situation perfectly. But instead of preparing for surrender, they implemented something they called the Last Stand Protocol. The display changed to show intercepted human communications, heavily encrypted transmissions that had taken months for alien cryptographers to decode. General Sam Carter was the supreme human military commander. She had been given absolute authority over all human military forces throughout their space. A new image appeared showing a human woman in her 60s, with steel-gray hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. She wore a simple military uniform with few decorations, but her bearing suggested someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions for millions of people. General Carter's first action was to recall every human ship from across the galaxy. Not just military vessels, but civilian transports, cargo haulers, research ships, even private yachts. Every human vessel capable of space travel was ordered to return to the Sol system immediately. The display showed the movement of thousands of ships converging on Earth from across human space. We thought this was a standard defensive measure, concentrating forces to protect their homeworld. We were completely wrong. HFY's expression became grim as he continued. Captain Helen Stone was General Carter's chief tactical coordinator. She had spent 2 years developing what humans called asymmetric defensive strategies, specifically designed to counter overwhelming enemy superiority. The display showed a human woman in her 40s, surrounded by holographic battle displays and tactical computers. Her expression was calm and professional, like someone solving a complex mathematical problem. Captain Stone had studied every battle humans had fought against galactic forces. She had analyzed our tactics, our psychology, our strategic thinking. Her conclusion was that conventional defense would be impossible against our combined fleets. The commander moved to point at specific areas on the strategic display. Stone's alternative was something no military strategist in galactic history had ever attempted. Instead of trying to win the battle for Earth, she planned to make victory so costly that our alliance would collapse from internal conflicts. The display changed to show the Sol system with defensive installations marked around every planet and major asteroid. The humans had spent 3 years turning their entire star system into the largest military installation ever constructed. Zethkar. Voice became quieter, forcing the large audience to listen carefully. Commander Pete Johnson operated the orbital defense platforms around Earth. These were not conventional weapons emplacements. They were disguised asteroid-moving systems that had been converted into kinetic bombardment platforms. A new image showed a human male in his 50s, working at a control station surrounded by displays showing the positions of hundreds of space-based installations. Johnson's platforms could accelerate chunks of rock and metal to significant fractions of light speed. The humans had essentially turned the asteroid belt into ammunition for the largest artillery system ever built. The audience stirred uneasily as they realized the implications. Kinetic weapons of that scale could destroy entire fleets or even damage planets. But the orbital defenses were only part of Stone's strategy. Admiral Grace Foster commanded what humans called the Deep Strike Fleet, positioned at the edge of the system with specific orders that terrified our intelligence analysts. The display showed a separate group of human ships, smaller than the main defensive force, but positioned in ways that made no tactical sense for defending Earth. Admiral Foster's fleet was not there to defend Earth. It was there to ensure that any force that attacked Earth would never leave the Sol system alive. Zethkar paused to let this information sink in before continuing. Foster's ships had been equipped with experimental weapons that violated several galactic treaties on acceptable warfare. Biological weapons, radiological dispersal devices, even gravitational distortion generators that could damage the fabric of space itself. The display showed technical specifications for weapons that made many in the audience visibly uncomfortable. But the most disturbing aspect of Foster's mission was not her weapons, it was her orders. The commander's 4 arms spread wide in a gesture of helplessness. Foster had been ordered to prevent any attacking force from returning to their home territories, regardless of the cost to Earth or the human population. If Earth fell, Foster would ensure that the victorious fleets would be too damaged to threaten other human colonies. A veteran Caltharian general raised 2 arms from the audience. "Sir, what about the human civilian population? Surely they would not sacrifice their own homeworld." Zethkar's expression became haunted. General Carter had prepared for that possibility as well. The Last Stand Protocol included provisions for the systematic destruction of Earth's entire biosphere if human defeat became inevitable. The display showed a network of installations across Earth's surface, each one marked with warning symbols indicating extreme danger. These were not military targets. They were industrial facilities, power plants, and research installations that had been rigged with devices capable of rendering the planet uninhabitable for centuries. The audience sat in stunned silence as the implications became clear. The humans were prepared to commit species suicide rather than accept defeat. They would destroy their own homeworld and ensure that their enemies gained nothing from victory. Zethkar moved to the edge of the stage, looking directly at the assembled military leaders. When our combined fleets arrived at the Sol system, we expected to face desperate but conventional resistance. Instead, we found something that no military force in galactic history had ever encountered. The display showed the moment when the Allied fleets entered the Sol system, their sensors detecting the massive human defensive installations for the first time. The humans did not attack immediately. Instead, General Carter transmitted a message to all 4 fleet commanders simultaneously. The text of Carter's message appeared on the display, written in the formal diplomatic language used for official communications between galactic powers. Carter's message was simple and direct. She informed us that the humans had calculated the exact cost of conquering Earth. She provided detailed projections of our likely casualties, the time required for occupation, and the resources that would be consumed in the process. Zefkar's voice became very quiet. Carter's calculations indicated that conquering Earth would cost us approximately 60% of our combined fleets and require ongoing occupation forces that would consume most of our military resources for decades. The display showed the detailed casualty projections and resource requirements that Carter had transmitted. The numbers were staggering, indicating losses that would cripple all 4 galactic powers. But Carter's message included additional information that made these projections even more disturbing. She informed us that Earth was not the only human world prepared for total self-destruction. The strategic map updated to show human colonies throughout the galaxy, each one marked with indicators suggesting similar defensive preparations. Every major human world had implemented its own version of the Last Stand Protocol.